In early 2026, the world once again found itself watching the Middle East with growing tension. For decades, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been defined by mistrust, political rivalry, and repeated confrontations. Diplomatic talks have come and gone, sanctions have been imposed and expanded, and military threats have often lingered just beneath the surface. But by the end of February 2026, the situation escalated dramatically. What had long been a cold and indirect conflict suddenly became something far more dangerous. The world watched closely, knowing that any mistake could send shockwaves across the entire globe. Chapter 1. A History of Tension. To understand the current crisis, we have to go back decades. The roots of the conflict between the United States and Iran trace back to the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Iran transformed from a U.S. allied monarchy into an Islamic republic strongly opposed to Western influence. Since then, relations between the two countries have been strained. Over the years, tensions grew around several key issues. Iran's nuclear program became a major source of concern for Western countries, who feared that nuclear technology could eventually be used to develop weapons. In response, the United States and its allies imposed economic sanctions aimed at limiting Iran's financial power and slowing its nuclear ambitions. These sanctions placed heavy pressure on Iran's economy and deepened the hostility between the two sides. At the same time, the two nations often found themselves on opposite sides of conflicts across the Middle East. From Syria to Iraq to Yemen, the geopolitical competition between the United States and Iran shaped regional politics for years. Despite occasional diplomatic agreements and negotiations, the relationship never fully stabilized. Instead, tensions continued building quietly in the background. Chapter 2. The Strike That Changed Everything. Then came February 28, 2026. Reports began emerging that major military strikes had been carried out against targets inside Iran. According to multiple sources, the operation involved United States and Israeli forces who targeted strategic military sites, including missile facilities, command centers, and air defense systems. Explosions were reported in several locations, including areas near Iran's capital. The strikes represented one of the most significant military confrontations between these nations in recent years. Soon after the attacks, shocking reports began circulating. Iranian state media later confirmed that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had died following the strikes. Khamenei had been Iran's most powerful political and religious authority for decades. His death immediately created uncertainty inside the country and across the region. The loss of such a central figure raised questions about leadership, stability, and how Iran would respond. For many observers, this moment marked a turning point. A long-standing geopolitical rivalry had now escalated into a direct and deadly confrontation. Chapter 3. Iran's Response. The response did not take long. Shortly after the strikes, Iran began launching missiles and drones targeting military assets linked to the United States and its allies across the region. Military bases were placed on high alert. Air defense systems were activated. Regional governments began preparing for the possibility that the conflict could expand beyond its initial targets. The exchange of strikes created an atmosphere of uncertainty across the Middle East. Each new development raised the same question. Would this remain a limited confrontation, or could it spiral into a much larger war? Military analysts warned that even a small escalation could pull multiple countries into the conflict. For civilians living in the region, the fear was immediate. Sirens, emergency alerts, and breaking news reports became part of daily life as people waited to see what would happen next. Chapter 4. Global Consequences. The impact of the conflict was not limited to the battlefield. Because the Middle East plays a major role in global energy supply, any instability in the region can quickly affect the entire world. One area receiving particular attention was the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which a large portion of the world's oil shipments travel. Any disruption to this route could have major consequences for international trade and energy prices. As tensions rose, markets reacted. Investors watched closely as governments held emergency meetings and diplomatic channels attempted to prevent further escalation.
At the United Nations, world leaders called for restraint and urged both sides to avoid actions that could widen the conflict. Diplomats warned that miscalculations during times like this can have serious consequences. While military forces prepared for the worst, international organizations pushed for dialogue and de-escalation. Chapter 5. The Big Questions. In moments like this, the world begins asking difficult questions. Why did the situation escalate to this point? Could it have been avoided? And what happens next? Inside Iran, the death of the supreme leader created a leadership transition that could reshape the country's political future. Internationally, governments began evaluating how the conflict might affect alliances, security policies, and regional stability. For analysts and historians, this moment represents another chapter in a complex relationship that has lasted for more than 40 decades. But unlike previous crises, this one involved a direct and dramatic shift in leadership and military confrontation, and that makes its consequences harder to predict. For now, the world continues to watch. Behind closed doors, diplomats negotiate, military leaders prepare for different scenarios, and millions of people across the region hope the conflict does not grow larger. History is often shaped by moments like these, moments when decisions made by a few leaders can influence the lives of millions. What happens next will depend on diplomacy, restraint, and the choices made in the days ahead. But one thing is certain: the events of early 2026 have already left a mark on global history, and the world will be watching closely to see where this story goes next.